editor-in-chief of Psychology's magazine. Here's our lovely new magazine, Ruby Wax, on the cover. I am joined today by the wonderful Shola Kaye, who is an award-winning speaker and author of Big Talk, Small Talk. And today we're going to be talking about how to talk. Oh, you have to excuse my little rescue dogs decided to make a little bit of an announcement in the middle of the broadcast. So I am delighted to be talking about the whole idea about what do we do when we are we've been given a talk to do, we've been given a broadcast to do, and how do we do it? How do we kind of calm our nerves? Because Shola, it's absolutely terrifying. Most people, I think, isn't it the number one fear of most people is public speaking? Is that true?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, whether it's true or not, whether if you're faced with impending death versus, I've got to speak to a small group of people, whether you choose the death over the people, I'm not so sure. But absolutely, I think people do say that public speaking is one of the major fears that they have.
So if you have got that kind of major fear of public speaking, I mean, at the moment we're in lockdown, and, for a lot of people, just being on Zoom and having to speak up on Zoom is a big thing, which we'll talk about in a minute. But how do we start to overcome our fear of, of public speaking? Where do we start with just kind of acknowledging it and then overcoming it?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are so many different reasons that people have fear of speaking. Quite often it's because something happened in childhood, something traumatic where perhaps a child was forced to speak up and then everybody laughed, and then they just completely internalised this, they're going to laugh at me. And then other times it's because we are worried that we'll be rejected if we make a mistake. So it's just fear of screwing up. And that goes back to sort of caveman times, if you like, where if we got rejected by our group, then most likely we would die because we'd be left out in the bushes and then eaten by wild animals and things. So a lot of the fear of speaking is actually, it can go away. It's not something that is really tangible, that can really hurt you, but it's just something that's in our heads. So this sounds like a bit of a cop-out thing to do, but one of the solutions we offer here is about breathing, deep breathing, because quite often when we stop breathing, then we don't get that flow of blood and oxygen sort of through the body and around the head, and so then of course we do freeze because we're not getting what we need to actually relax and calm down. And also deep breathing helps to actually calm down the nervous system as well. So it's a very easy little tip. Sounds easy, sounds simple, doesn't it? But not so easy to do, basically. And then one of the ones that I tend to work on with my clients when I'm doing public speaking coaching is around having frameworks. So which we'll talk about in a little bit, Susie, I'm sure, but having frameworks for what you want to say. Because when you've got the pathway where you're trying to go with your speaking, you're more likely to focus on what you've got to say than on, everyone's looking at me, that person in the front frowning at me, all those sorts of questions that we start doubting ourselves.
So, well, let's talk about that framework, because you're right. For me, it's happened to me many times when I've been doing a talk and my mind goes, I see that man in the front row frowning at me and my mind goes completely blank. And that terror of just literally there's nothing there, because I think it's the freeze, the adrenaline kicks in, you get, freeze, flee or fight. And I get the freeze thing. So what kind of structure? So if you can kind of find your way back to a structure, what does that look like? A basic structure around a talk or a kind of, even if you're going to be doing a kind of, contributing to a meeting, what kind of structure should we use?
Yeah, well, the most basic one that you can use that works for public speaking and also just for on-the-spot speaking in a meeting, spontaneous, is what I call the PEEP framework. So it's P-E-E-E-P. And what that stands for, P stands for your point. So what is it that you're trying to get across at a high level? And then each of the E's stands for an example. So that example could be some data, it could be facts and figures, it could be just a little bit of extra supporting evidence of the main point that you're trying to make. And then you wrap up the whole thing by saying at the end, so that was the point that I wanted to make. And so the reason that this is such a handy little framework and it's used in lots of situations is, first of all, most people can come up with 3 bits of evidence that support their point. It's quite easy to come up with those. And then also what you can do is at the beginning, when you're speaking, you can say, well, I believe lockdown should end tomorrow, and I've got 3 reasons why. Okay, so as soon as you say 3 reasons, that does a couple of things. First of all, anybody who's about to interrupt you, they're oh, 3 reasons. They'll sit back and wait because they know what's coming.
Yeah.
Then what it also does is it tells this thing here, okay, I've got to come up with 3 reasons right now. So then instead of you worrying about what are they thinking, etc., you're thinking of the 3 reasons. So you're thinking of what you should be thinking of, which is the point that you're trying to make. And it's interesting because some people say, well, what if I don't have 3? And I've worked with even people who are barristers who defend, people's lives for a living, and they've said, oh, well, I use that framework, and sometimes I've only got 2.5, or sometimes I've only got 2, but it doesn't matter. I'll always come up with some little thing at the end to pad out number 3. So don't worry if you haven't got 3. You might do 2 and then go into more detail on the second one. That doesn't matter, but it just gives you a bit of a roadmap for where you're going. And then at the very end, when you've made your 3 points, or your 2.5, then you sum up saying, well, that's why I think bloody blah, blah, blah. And then what that does is it rounds off what you're saying. Because all too often we just trail off like, well, I think, very apologetically. And that's not a strong way to come across. So, so you want to have a nice go out with a bang, summing up your point. And this framework is excellent just on the fly because you can always come up with three reasons. But also, a lot of public speakers, myself included, professional speakers, will base an entire presentation around 3 main points. They've got the sort of this is the gist of the presentation. Then they've got 3 points, and they'll break them out, in various levels of detail, depending how long you've got to speak for. And then they'll summarize it later. So that little framework can serve you for an hour-long presentation, could serve you for a 1-day workshop, could serve you for a 2-minute Zoom sort of giving your 2 pennies worth in a Zoom call. Yeah.
I mean, so in terms of a kind of professional, this sounds a great way of doing it. It's just, as you say, keeping to that 3-point structure, strong beginning, strong end. Fantastic. Your book is Big Talk, Small Talk. So I think I find it much easier to do this kind of thing that you've talked about in a professional setting than I do with small talk. I'm really, really rubbish with small talk. And what would you advise about people who are, feel like I do, that don't feel very confident about, just making small talk at a party or socially? What advice can you give us around how we can kind of help ourselves to do better?
Good question. And I'm exactly the same. I'm a huge introvert, and I used to go to parties with a book, and I'd find a seat in the corner, sit with my book, and my friends would say, "What's wrong with you? Why aren't you mixing with us?" So I totally get that. And I think the first thing to acknowledge with small talk is that it is awkward. It's awkward for almost, I'd probably say, most people. And those people that enjoy it, they'll just kind of push through that kind of awkwardness because they know that what's at the other end is gold. It's connections, it's perhaps a few laughs, it's who knows what potential can come, but you've got to start somewhere. So I think by taking the heat off yourself and not expecting too much, that I think is one way that you can ease the trouble and the transition into small talk. And there's a great book called How to Be an Imperfectionist by Stephen Guise, Guise. And he talks about the fact that often people who are perfectionists, they have very specific and high expectations. So if you can instead of having specific and high expectations, have general, but still have high expectations, but just general. So not well, I'm going to say this very witty thing and then everyone's going to laugh. I'm just going to say hello and I'll talk to 2 or 3 people by the end of the day. And those sorts of just very low-key expectations, which are still positive, are what will sort of take you through these awkward moments because you're not expecting the earth to move and amazing things to happen, but just have a couple of simple conversations with the people around you.
I mean, I think that the having a simple conversation is a great aspiration to have. What I have learned to do is, so if I'm nervous, often I'm going to events where I'm just going on my own because it's a professional event, but it's those things where you're standing around with a drink. Oh my goodness, it makes my heart sink. But what I've learned to do is just ask questions. So I assume that everyone else feels the same as me. And I just go around, I introduce myself and I say, oh, why are you here? Or how do you know the host? Or, just those really stock questions. And then, or trying to, and that's really, honestly, that's really, really helped me, because then people are so grateful to be given they talk, and it just, you start to make real connections, and that's really, really helped me as well. So it's just a simple question, isn't it, to ask as well? That's really, really, really helped me. In terms of sometimes there are those life-changing talks that we have to give. So it might be a TED talk, or it's a really big kind of presentation, to win the business or to turn the business around. Or how can we prepare? If hand on heart we had to prepare for that, we've got the terror, we're doing the deep breathing, but we have to kind of prepare in a way that you were kind of coaching ourselves to do the best we possibly can. Have you got any tips on, the really big talk that we're going to give, apart from the 3 tips? Anything we should be preparing? How else?
Yes. Well, obviously making sure that you've given yourself enough time, because all too often people think, oh, well, either they're afraid and they'll leave things to the last moment so that they can just stave off the fear. Or another thing that tends to happen with big talks is people think that it's all about the content, and they forget the delivery again until the very last moment. And however wonderful your content is, if you haven't practiced your delivery, then that you can sort of live and die by. It's great content, but you're sweating profusely, or you stumble over your words. So it's to make sure that you prepare very early so that you have plenty of time to practice. And to also make sure that you practice in front of different audiences. So whether you talk about it over dinner with your family, and then you talk to some colleagues, and then you talk to a group of strangers, or you find some people associated with the event who are happy to have you practice. But you really want to get yourself in as many different situations as you possibly can to help you sort of overcome those nerves, and also the fear of the unknown. Because things do happen. Maybe someone sort of makes a coughs loudly, or the lights go funny, or things happen that can throw you off. So you want to make sure that you really sort of test out your ability to carry on and get through this presentation. So I definitely say doing that. Another thing that you can do is, if it's a big presentation, you may want to record what you've got to say on your phone or just some other device. And then make sure first thing in the morning and last thing at night, you play it through to yourself. And you'd be amazed at how easily you start to memorize. It just starts to become internalized in you. And so then you're, again, less likely to have these moments where you freeze, because it's there. It just starts to flow out of you.
Yeah, brilliant. That's brilliant advice. In terms, I know you're a massive fan of stories and storytelling, and to grab people's attention. I think I always say that our being able to grab people's attention and our storytelling skills. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm that's what we do at the magazine, but it's our currency these days, because there's all of these people through social media or whatever trying to grab our attention. So in terms of storytelling, when we're trying to, what kind of story should we be sharing? Is it, we talk a lot about authenticity at Psychologies, it's about sharing something's authentic to you. But some people don't want to do that. What advice have you got about sharing great stories?
I think it's so important, because often it's the story that goes before us, and when we're not in the room, that's the person that did that. That's the one that did so and so. So
Yeah.
I think if we don't tell stories about ourselves, we are doing ourselves a disservice, because we can't become a lot less memorable than the next person. And I do get that there's some people don't want to sort of spill all their guts in public, and they don't want to have everything out there. So you've got to choose which story you would like to be almost part of your personal brand, if you like. So that's the one that goes before you. And if you can select that story, and also tell a story about perhaps a challenge that you've overcome, because I think when people often shy away from stories because they think, well, I'm just bigging myself up, or I'll come across as unapproachable or unrelatable. But if you can find a story, we want to share the successes that you've had, but then you talk about them in the context of challenges that you've overcome in the past. That makes you much, much, much more relatable. And then also what you can do is talk about how you overcame those challenges. And then that means that gives people an actual takeaway that they can apply to their own lives. And it could be as simple as, oh, well, I've just been promoted to this great new job. But if you'd seen me 6 months ago, I was at my wit's end. I just lost my job because of COVID, had no idea what I was going to do next. But it was through taking a couple of courses online when I had some downtime. And it was through making lots and lots of applications, just hard work, that I eventually found this job of my dreams. So people have got the takeaway, oh, okay, hard work, doing a couple of courses, they've learned something for themselves, as well as heard that you're somebody who's a bit of a fighter and can overcome a challenge. So that's the way you want to phrase your stories. So then you can put some detail in, you can enjoy telling the story, and you know that the people who are listening have got some more takeaways.
Yeah, brilliant. So again, powerful story is important. Can I ask a question around how important is about, I don't know, there's some kind of statistic about how what we wear and what we look like, and that's really important. So when we're standing up and doing a talk, or even on a Zoom call, you know, how important is the background? How important is it what we're wearing? You know, you talked about personal brand earlier. Do we really have to kind of take, you know, my thing is all about the content. To me, it's really important. You know, it's all about the words. It's all about the stories. But someone said to me, that doesn't matter. The most important thing is how you present. You grab people's attention in the first 7 seconds or something like that. I don't know if that's true. But what do you think about that? How important is our presentation?
Well, people are visual creatures, aren't we? We all are. So we're using a visual medium. If you're on a computer and you're looking at Zoom, for example, there's not many other places to look besides at this person who's doing the speaking. So I'm not saying you've got to sort of put your glad rags on and your sort of lipstick and get your hair done before you speak, because that may not be who you are. But you want to give the best impression of while you're still being authentic, the best you that you can be in that circumstance, while still, as I say, maintaining that authenticity. Because if you think about a song, for example, quite often it's the music that will get us in before we listen to the lyrics, right? So in the same way, it might be somebody's appearance that turns us off before we can even hear their fantastic message that's in the words. So we've got to understand that while we don't have to, as I say, kind of go too far with the appearance, at least just have something that's kind of perhaps pleasing to the eye, or at least adequately represents you. So if somebody says, oh, I don't like that, you can at least say, well, that's what I stand for. Tough luck.
I suppose it's consciously thinking about it, consciously kind of maybe taking a video of yourself and sort of saying, well, what does that, you know, trying to look at yourself dispassionately, or getting somebody to say, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? What is your image trying to say? I remember in a creative writing exercise that I once did, you know, you had to do people watching, and you were sort of, and what I was amazed at actually when you sit and watch people is how people, so many of us wear black and grey and almost invisible, and how you can really stand out, for example, by wearing colour, and you know, those people stand out, and it's just that they're eye catching. And so it's about, you know, by the colours you wear, or whether it's where you lipstick or not lipstick, or trainers or high heels, or it's all telling a story about who you are. So I think it's a really interesting thing, because we're so kind of, it's all about who you really are, not about how you look. But someone said, I would, you know, have a look at that belief system, because yes, of course it is about, you know, authenticity, but people are making judgments about you all the time just because of the way you look. So it's really interesting. So Shola, I know that you've got a really fantastic free download for us. Tell us a little bit about that. I think it's up or down below. There's something where people can use this for public speaking, a framework or something. What is it?
Yes, yeah. So one of my most popular downloads is called my short speech frameworks. And I think there's about 5 different frameworks that you can use, whether you're on a Zoom call, whether you're making a longer presentation. But for example, sometimes you might want to give make a presentation based on a timeline. Other times it might be about bullet points, or it might be about a sort of for and against. So it just gives you some pointers. And if you're a bit stuck as to how to present your information, that can often just be enough to get the cogs rolling again and give you some ideas as to how to put things together. So it's called my Short Speech Frameworks PDF.
And you can download that below. Shola, thank you so much for your time today. Psychologist readers are really passionate. You know, a lot of our readers are coaches, or they're running their own businesses. So I think learning how to promote yourself by public speaking, or just as a skill, even just at a party, just to kind of connect more, you know, around connecting with people, it's just such an important, and it is a skill that we can all learn. And I, you know, thank you very much for coming today and sharing your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Susie. It was a real pleasure. Thanks.
Okay, lots of love. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.